I didn't go to film school. And so there was a question and answer at the end, and somebody raised their hand and said, "Hey, do you recommend going to film school?" And I'm literally out of film school speaking in front of all these students.
No one's just like going to stumble on you and go, I'm going to give you $5 million to go make the movie you want to make. Just go make stuff.
But if we had gone through the typical education process and gone on to film school, we wouldn't be doing it differently. It would have limited the ceiling of my creativity.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. I'm Charlie Deist here alongside Matt Bowman, and today we are joined by Ben Smallbone and Ben Kasica, the director and showrunner, respectively, for a new film and TV series called Homestead. Asked a lot of really interesting questions about a world where the technological foundations of our society suddenly crumble. Some would call it a kind of post-apocalyptic film. We're going to dive into that with both Bens today. Smallbone, Kasica, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So, you know, as educators and parents, we often talk about the need to reduce screen time, kind of get back to basics. Homestead really takes this to a whole new level. I mean, what inspired you to explore this theme of sort of technological dependence, and how did that shape the story that you wanted to tell?
I got connected to this project and really the book called Black Autumn that the film and show is based off of about 2 years ago. And I went to a tactical training kind of getaway, which is not something I often frequent, and where there was a bunch of cool entrepreneurs there and guys and their kids and all that. And in short, it was here's a gun, laser tag gun. You heard a bump in the night, and go make sure that your office is clear or this room is cleared. And I had no experience in any of that. And so through humiliation, they teach you like, this is what you actually should do. And, kind of your awareness. But I had met a guy named Jason Orbis, and he was a prepper homesteader, lived on 300, 400 acres. And as the whole story is kind of based off of his life, to be honest. And I was just so struck by a couple things. One, the fact that there's great storytelling just in what they were doing with the book, and it had gone on to sell 1 million copies and do very well. But seeing the way that they were combating kind of the modern world and modern technology and things like that through getting back to the roots, getting back to planting tomatoes and sourdough bread and things like that. And we saw that trend during COVID, where people were just at home, and they, all of a sudden this idea of homesteading, this term kind of started going viral, even though people had been doing it for, 100 years or whatever. Now the trend was, hey, I think I'm going to grow tomatoes, and I think I'm going to make sourdough bread, and maybe I should start planting my own herbs and things like that. And so we saw this kind of shift happening where people, in light of this epidemic where people are, a lot of people are dying, people are getting sick, et cetera, they're stuck at home and they can't work as normal. They're returning to the earth and returning to these old ways. And that's definitely a theme that's in the film. We see this bomb go off in Los Angeles, and the power grid goes out and the internet's down. Like, what are you going to do? And, we love telling the story of people coming together, communities coming together to survive and to figure things out together. And so, I was super drawn to that. And then Smallbone and I met a number of years ago, and we always said it would be cool to work on something together. And so, yes, Smallbone, why don't you share a little bit about your kind of experience on the project?
Yeah, it was a unique experience for me. I grew up on a farm, 40 acres, and we always, as siblings, kind of played with the mind games of, hey, if the world ended tomorrow, what would we do? Which horse would we, shoot first? And what pet goat would we eat? And fast forward to 2020, there was a brief moment where grocery stores were running out of food, and there was some gas stations just down the road from me that ran out of gas. And literally I called my brothers and go, hey, what are we doing, guys? What's the plan here if the world ends and everything goes down? And the plan was to escape to my parents' 40 acres and figure out exactly that. Which horse are we going to shoot first? Which goats do we love too much to eat for dinner? And then not long after that, Ben Kasica reached out and said, hey, we've got this really unique project, this book series that we want to turn into a movie and a TV show. Would you be interested in being a part of that? And I said, absolutely. And I grew up in the 90s pretty much going to every post-apocalyptic faith-based film I could. Those were the films that my parents let me go see in movie theaters. I joke frequently that we weren't allowed to see PG-13 movies till we were 17. And that is not really a joke, but if it was faith-based, and it was post-apocalyptic faith-based, my parents were very excited about us going in and supporting those films. So I saw all of them. I saw Left Behind. I saw Omega Code 1, 2, and 3. And I'm trying to put this nicely, but guys, they weren't very good. And me and my brothers dreamed about someday having an opportunity to kind of reimagine these stories. And Homestead was that for me. It was a pretty incredible and exciting experience of reimagining kind of the post-apocalyptic world, but not about people, not about zombies, not about, us disappearing and our clothes being left behind, but figuring out how to build community and survive together. And it was really, really fun experience shooting that in the mountains of Utah.
I want to come back to that idea of sort of the genre of post-apocalyptic films and maybe have you summarize what were the features of those movies that you grew up on versus the one that you guys created. But first, I want to hear, Matt, you were talking a little bit before we hit record about, how you sort of first met these guys and how you became interested in doing a podcast about open education. Why don't you set the stage there, Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So I am a big fan of movies that amplify light. You're right. So it's the idea that we want Hollywood and others to pay attention, that there's an audience out here that wants movies that inspire and uplift and not just destroy. And so I've known the Angel Studios guys for many years. We're big supporters of Angel Studios. And when I got an opportunity, I got to go up to one of the film shoots up in the mountains of Utah and saw a couple of, boys roaming the mountains, behind the scenes. And I just got giddy with excitement that I hope that the parents were viewing this as education, because I'm truly a believer of open education. You can learn more elsewhere. Real learning happens beyond the classroom. And so someone introduced me to Ben Smallbone and said, oh, he's the dad of those boys roaming around. And so I had a great opportunity to just say, tell me about your schooling on the set strategy. And if you remember, Smallbones, you said that many people criticize your choice to bring your boys along and do schooling on, behind the scenes and alternative education and open education. And I was hopefully someone there that was supporting what you were doing. And then I spoke with Kasica, and he grew up homeschooled too. And so I was like, okay, we've got a couple of great leaders, great entrepreneurs, great, successful men. And I wanted to bring them on and just say, what was your education like growing up? And what do you envision education in the future for your own families? And just thought it was a great opportunity to bring them on with OpenEd.
Yeah, so my journey to homeschooling was kind of out of requirement. I grew up in Australia. I was born in Sydney, Australia, and we moved to the States in 1991. And my parents were, uh, put it nicely, not excited about the schooling system in the United States. So we decided we were only going to be here for a year or two at the time, which turned into 30 something years, but that we were just going to homeschool for a brief period of time, and then figure out if we could afford private school or what the schooling system would look like. Worth stating, I had 6 brothers and sisters, so this wasn't just the normal homeschooling. This was a lot of work for my mom and dad. And very quickly, we were thrust into an incredibly difficult situation where my dad lost his job. We had no money to buy even furniture at the house that we were living in at the time. And homeschooling was, again, kind of a necessity because if we weren't doing school, we were working to make ends meet. We started a lawn mowing business. We started raking leaves in the fall. In the winter, we were cleaning people's houses. And so we couldn't support the family and being able to stay in the States if we didn't homeschool. And so we would get up in the morning. We would take the clothes. Our beds were made out of our own clothes. I still remember the hoodie that I wore day after day after day was my pillow. We'd stuff it in a pillowcase. And then we would go to work. We would go mow for a few hours and then come back home, and mom would sit us down and we would do maybe an hour and 30 minutes of school, and, learn to read and write. But what I learned watching my parents hard work and what I learned from meeting people and building a small little business to survive was way more than what we were learning in the classroom from mom. And mom made a prayer, and I still remember it was a very public prayer. She said, God, hey, if this is the way that we're going to have to live our lives to survive, please teach my kids what they need to know. And within 6 months, my sister, she got a record deal. She was a singer under the stage name Rebecca St. James. And that took off. And we very quickly went from mowing lawns and cleaning people's homes to being her road crew. I worked in lighting. My other brother sang background vocals. My other brother did, sound and stage managing. And again, we were thrust into a situation where school, typical schooling was incredibly difficult. And we learned, again, more doing math, trying to figure out how we're going to plug in power into a 50 amp breaker and pull off the show the way it needed to be than we did using the textbooks that we also had. And so that God was with us through that, and mom's prayer was answered. We were taught in the world of creative thought and thinking outside of the box, and all my siblings now are either in music or in film, and a lot of times we do it together. And my mom's prayer, her meek little prayer out of desperation, crying out to God, saying, hey, please teach my kids what they need to know. And we did. And we learned so much more traveling around the country, meeting new people, doing what we, now do as professionals in our 30s and 40s on the road, living as a family. So that's my homeschool journey. And a lot of that I've tried to now implement into my two boys who are 9 and 13, and they travel with me as much as they can. And again, learning from doing instead of a typical classroom setting.
What would you say are some of the main things, maybe some specific examples of like learning that takes place on a set? I can only imagine. I've never even been on a film set before. Where do you, and when you were growing up, was it the same kinds of lessons, or do you feel like it's a different experience for your boys than it was for you?
Yeah, definitely different. When I was 13 is when we really started traveling. And when I say traveling, I went to every state in the United States and 36 different countries by the time I was 18. And, there's an element of homeschooling. And it being a homeschool, I feel like I can say this, where you don't have the social dynamic that I think is important for the development of a teenager. Well, we had that. We were thrust into incredibly difficult situations where we had to speak and talk with adults, lead. We'd have 20 to 30 volunteers and crew that are listening to 13 and 15 and 17-year-olds tell them what to do. That I think created a lot of the work ethic that we have. I think it gave us a lot of leadership abilities that I don't know would have existed without that. But we were doing real-time math. We were, writing letters to promoters and venues, talking through, some of the elements of the show that were really, really important to us. We were putting together drawings of stage plots, all things that you can learn in different ways through typical schooling. Now we were having to learn and in outside of the box ways. And now on the film set, we don't have as many opportunities. Film sets are a lot different than 90s traveling around as the Von Trapp family, with 7 kids and my parents. But as much as I can, my oldest, I've taught how to fly drones. And so he's flying drones and trying to figure out elevations, and there's some mathematical equations of movement of drone and speed and that kind of thing that he's learning. My youngest is still he's only 9, so I haven't thrust him into any responsibilities yet on film sets. But the social dynamic that he's able to learn by looking at people in the eyes and shaking their hands, and how do you communicate. And um, people are constantly coming up to him and asking him, "Oh, so you're Ben Smallbone's son," and he's having conversations with adults constantly, that I think he's learning a lot of really important social lessons from those kind of situations.
It seems like, homeschool is really a misnomer for both your experience and the one that your sons are having, where a lot of the education is happening out there in the world, on the road. We hear people talk about road schooling, world schooling, unschooling, deschooling. We like to lump it all under this label of sort of open education, that the world is the classroom and that any of these things can be a learning opportunity. And oftentimes, when there's a real world application for it, like writing the letters or doing the math around the finances, you see why it matters. And that old question, all the kids, and I remember as a kid in math class asking, when am I ever going to use this? Those questions, the answer is a lot more obvious.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And Matt said it succinctly. We've got I've gotten a little bit of a hard time, even from some family members that are homeschooling their own kids, with how much I try to take them with me. But I see it. I see the kids not just learning in the textbooks, but applying it to their lives. And gosh, I was that kid that sat in that hour and a half of schooling that we did with mom, going, "Mom, how am I ever going to use these fractions?" And then, literally the next day, taking what I had learned in the classroom in a real world setting and using fractions to figure out how we were going to, do the stage plot. And my kids are seeing that too. And that's the way that I learn best. And my kids are learning, hopefully, learning in the same ways on the film set, in travel, in what we do day in, day out.
I didn't mention this at the beginning of the show, but I want to switch over to Kasica and talk a little bit about your past life as the lead guitarist of the band Skillet. Some of our listeners might know the band. You guys were a very successful group. I'm sure that you spent a lot of time touring on the road. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey from childhood to that? Draw the through line, if there is one, about your education leading up to this multifaceted career that you've had both in music and now in the film and entertainment industry.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is that our Ben Smallbone's path and mine crossed back when he was on tour, and I joined the band when I was 16 years old, and so I remember playing shows with Rebecca St. James, and I don't remember meeting Ben, but I do remember like the brothers were just kind of running around, and one of the brothers was like a background singer. So this is, I mean, literally, I'm 40 now, so this was 23 years ago, right, where we were running around just like life schooling, right, and but before that, my parents were kind of the hippies and found Jesus and were the kind of radical Jesus people. And, they were not traditional. I mean, my dad went to Juilliard and, he was educated really well and things like that. But as far as like their parenting, they were very non-traditional. And I spent 2 years in school, first grade and fourth grade. Everything else was homeschooled or through like a co-op type of thing where it was like a 2 day a week type thing. And I absolutely loved it. And what it did for me was build a foundation of learning how to learn. That's what I feel like was ingrained in me. Was I learned how to learn. I'm using that to this day, where I'm exploring new, entrepreneurial endeavors or whatever that is. And so that foundation of, it was shocking to me and a lot of my friends where we would do school in the morning and I would get done with all of my class by like 10:30 a.m., 11 a.m. And then I had the whole rest of the day to do whatever, and I would often go to my parents and they had non-traditional jobs. They were musicians, like professional musicians. My dad played in the St. Louis Symphony and my mom played in orchestras and things like that. And so they were around during the day and they would, go play concerts at night. And so in being around, I'm bored. What do I do? And they're like, go find something to do outside. And so, you're building forts and building weapons and chasing beavers and like whatever you kind of discovered. And that was such a great adventure for me. And I saw myself starting to apply those things. I joined the band again when I was 16. I would not have been able to do that if I was in traditional school. And so I went on tour, and this was back in the van and trailer days. So We were assigned to a tiny little record label, and my parents, I think they were okay with me leaving because of the ministry side of what Skillet was doing, and being really radical in that. And but anyway, I was on tour doing, sending homework via email back to my tutors that were at the co-op, and it all just kind of worked out. But it set this amazing foundation of like, you don't have to do it like the old fashioned way. There's new ways of learning life and life learning that are really amazing and can introduce you to amazing opportunities. I think that was Smallbone's experience too. Like, you went out on tour. I did the same thing. And I think, by the time I was 21, I'd already spent 5 years touring. I started a t-shirt company. Like, I had all these crazy experiences where some folks are like just getting out of college, just figuring out like, what am I going to do? A lot of my friends that were the same age as me still had no idea what they were doing. And I was 5 years into a career, having started 1 or 2 businesses. And so homeschooling for me was this amazing foundation for, hey, there's a different way to do life. And I think when you travel, you start to see that differently as well. If you're just stuck in kind of like small town America, you don't know that there's a whole other world with different countries that have different cultures and approach education differently than what America does. That was always really inspiring to me. And one of my favorite TED Talks was a guy, Sir Ken Robinson. I think his title was like, "Do schools kill creativity?" And when I heard that, I think he's got 2 TED Talks now, but I was so inspired by that. And I'm like, I want to be a part of some kind of education reform. Like, my wife and I don't have kids yet, but we want to be a part of doing something differently. That's super, super inspiring, because I think we see that creativity, rather than hamper it and be like, oh, he's got ADHD and he needs medicine. It's like, Ken Robinson was like, oh, maybe this girl is a dancer and she just needs to dance. And, this incredible stories that when you allow space for that, rather than damper it, like, there's amazing giftings that people have that wouldn't get activated any other way than looking at it differently. And so that was my experience with homeschooling.
I mean, that comes almost straight out of our playbook. The way you're speaking our language, Ben. And I'll also add, I mentioned at the beginning that you are showrunner on this, but you're also the executive producer for the Homestead film and or the TV series portion, at least. And what's interesting about this film is, we've seen a shift. People talk about the golden age of television. I think it's continuing. I haven't been to a theater in a long time, partly because I'm living out here in the sticks on a remote homestead myself. I'm hoping to get to see the film, but I'm really excited to start the marathon, or start watching the TV series that picks up, I think, if I understand right where the film leaves off. So you guys created this film. It's sort of a novel thing. Do has anyone else done this, where the film really is like the first episodes of the TV series?
So there's been films that have followed up TV shows, kind of at a later date, or started, and then eventually it became a TV show. We've not seen it done right at the same time. We felt like it was a pretty novel idea. It's funny, we've gotten some mixed reviews on that, because I think people are like, they finished the movie and they're like, wait a minute, there's still a story? Like, okay, not expecting that. But we thought it was such a great way to launch a big brand of Homestead. And the film, you go to theaters, it's this big experience where you see it on the big screen, and then you go home and we all binge television. Like, we all want to watch stuff in the comfort of our home. By the way, we'll send you a link to the film. We'd love for you to check it out. But yeah, we thought it was a really innovative thing. And we thought, if this worked, a lot of people are going to do this. If it fails, then it wasn't our idea. But no, it's been a cool experience. And I think we've seen already people are excited about, you spend 2 hours getting to know characters and seeing a world that's built, and you build a relationship with it. And then the movie ends and you're like, oh, I guess like maybe there's a sequel someday. But it's kind of a letdown, actually, when that story doesn't go anywhere. And so, in addition to that television show that we have that's based on this 10 book series, there's so much material there, and seeing this post-apocalyptic world kind of expand into all these different avenues. We also have hey, if you want a homestead at home, this is actually how you do that. So we have an unscripted show that is like kind of a companion piece to the television show, and that's out now. There's a bunch of episodes on Angel Studios app. And that's just a really kind of cool way to like, hey, I don't even know where to start. Where do I start on this? And there's like a hands-on way to learn how to homestead and what that even means. So yeah, we're trying to give people like all these different access points to engage with this world of homestead.
Man, count me in. I'm going to check that out. It's been I've only been up here for a little over a year, and I can confirm that the learning curve is steep on homesteading. Everything from building chicken coops and putting up and everyone's going to have a different setup depending on their sort of geography. But there's a hunger for this knowledge. I see it in the same way that there's a hunger for the knowledge around how to do homeschooling in this new way. And there's an opportunity both with the proliferation of new technologies like the fact that you can have an AI tutor with Khan Academy, so a parent doesn't have to be an expert in math or science. They don't have to be like a PhD level in learning science in order to take a little bit more ownership over their kids' education. Similarly, with homesteading, I'm able to do this interview with you guys over Starlink. And I think, I would just encourage anybody that's been drawn to either path to reconsider what you can do now because of technology. And we have this sort of love-hate relationship with it. But I think that we have the ability to pick what works for us and bring the best of the old, the best of the new. Kind of going back to the idea of an apocalyptic film or a post-apocalyptic film. Smallbone, you mentioned at the beginning this sort of genre that you grew up on. I imagine that a lot of times those films end and they have maybe some kind of a cathartic moment. But it sounds like with the Homestead film and the TV series, there's a little bit of a spoiler built into what you told us, Kasica, because we know that the story doesn't end. We know that it's not like everybody just gets wiped off at the end. So curious to hear a little bit more about how you guys conceive, or I guess it's based on a book, but like how does the film differ from the traditional post-apocalyptic genre in your interpretation of that genre?
Well, try not to give anything away. It doesn't have zombies. I actually briefly worked on a show called The Walking Dead that was a huge hit down in Atlanta, Georgia. I moved down there, pursued some film stuff for a few years. And this is nothing like that. I feel like people walking in post-apocalyptic think zombies, that, or Left Behind, where people's clothes are disappearing. That is neither one of those. This concept is very built in reality, and even watching some of the fires this last week in California, it's surreal because the opening 10 minutes of the movie looks almost identical to some of these pictures that I keep seeing coming out of California. But the concept is a bomb goes off in LA, and all of these families escape to this billionaire's homestead in the mountains. And they quickly realize that some of the people inside of the gates of this homestead are just as dangerous and just as crazy as the people outside. And they have to figure out how to unify and survive together. And that kind of sets up the journey and the conflicts of where the series is going. I don't want to give away too much, especially considering, Charlie, you haven't seen it yet. But it's not your mom and pops, your grandparents' post-apocalyptic film in any way. It's a really fresh new take of that kind of storyline. And what does it look like if instead of building walls and machine guns, and that's an element of the story, and pushing people away, what if instead we build community? What if instead we celebrate our similarities instead of just our differences? And what does that look like in order to survive coming together? And so again, that's the concept of it, and don't want to give anything more away than that, considering you haven't seen it yet, Charlie.
So it's kind of the fortress mentality versus we won't spoil anything, and I do look forward to seeing the film. Matt, what would you say as someone who's been kind of a supporter of this kind of effort? What stood out to you from the movie? Is there any kind of homeschool angle? I saw that maybe one of the characters is homeschooled in the film. Well, what could we say about the sort of homeschool to homestead pipeline that seems to be percolating up to the surface?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd probably defer to the Bens to interpret that, but I would just say that I really like Smallbone's point around building community. I think that is what our nation needs. That's what our world needs. And for a long time, people have thought that local public schools were the community builders of our society. And that's just changed. And so with that change, people are trying to figure out how to build communities then. If it's not built around the public school where everybody is united on one front, then what else do we need? How else do we build our, the fabric of our nation's communities? And it really it starts with families, neighbors, friends, communities, versus just saying, oh, that just happens at the district school. So that's really what I like about this message of, let's work together to build communities. And it just looks differently than it might have looked even just pre-COVID, right? COVID did a lot of this that opened up how do we build local communities outside of a shut down school. And we were able to do it. And so I think parents are now, especially new parents, are starting to say, I think there's other ways to view my education journey for my children that's actually going to be more positive than it might have been in the past. And so that's what's super exciting for me.
I'm sure that there are a lot of aspiring filmmakers in our program, and I know we even have some kind of course offerings and partners. There's one called Sneak on the Lot that gives people a behind the scenes look at what goes on a set. But what advice would you guys have to a young person, say a teenager who's really getting into filmmaking of some kind? Like, give us a sort of state of the industry and what career advice you would give to somebody. Should they spend $40,000 going to film school, or are there other maybe more direct paths for them to get a foothold in what people have considered to be a pretty competitive industry?
I'll take that one. I spoke at a film school a few years ago, and well, one, I didn't go to film school, and so there was a question and answer at the end, and somebody raised their hand and said, "Hey, do you recommend going to film school?" And I'm literally at a film school speaking in front of all these students, and so I had to be really political about how I answered. Needless to say, I haven't been asked back. No, to me, so much of what the beauty of homeschooling, and Kasica mentioned it earlier, is it gives you an incredible framework of experimenting in what you want to do with your life. And, so much of the public school system is, it's like a 9 to 5 job. It's so scheduled. It's so ritual. Every kid's being taught the same. I was able to get school done. If I was really focused, if I was able to get school done in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then I had 7 or 8 hours to go out and I was into photography. And that photography then led me to writing. I wrote a book when I was 15. And then that book, I was like, hey, what if we turn this into a movie, into a screenplay? And by 16, I had 6 siblings. Every single one of them was in my film in some way or another. They were actors and singers, and so they were definitely connected to the arts. And we were able to. My parents bought me a $2,500 camera and went out and made a film. We never finished it, and it was very bad. But it allowed us to experiment in our creativity. It allowed us to work together. It allowed us to learn how, things work or don't work. What lighting looks nice, and shooting at golden hour right before sunset is way prettier than shooting in the middle of the day. And it was a safe place for us to experiment in things that we were passionate about. I got into drumming. I really quickly realized I wasn't a band guy, and that I really wanted to lean more into filmmaking. So, to me, homeschooling was such an incredible framework for experimenting in my creativity and learning in a safe place in what I do. So what I would say to budding filmmakers is just do it. Just, don't let equipment. The beauty about modern day technology is equipment is no longer the limiter of what you can or cannot do. The fact that you're doing this call over satellite video and we're able to see each other and communicate with each other. The same thing with filmmaking. You can go to Best Buy or Walmart and buy a camera that you can literally make a movie on that could be released to movie theaters. There's scenes in Homestead that we shot with a very limited crew with a camera that you can buy for a few $1,000s at Best Buy, with software on my computer that's sitting in front of me right now that you can pay $29.95 a month for and edit your movie on. And so, again, technology is no longer the limiter of creativity. Get out there, make something, learn, fail over and over and over again. Guys, if you saw the first few films that I made, they were tragically bad, embarrassingly bad. But my siblings pointed out how bad they were. And then next time we got a little bit better and we laughed about it and we learned together in the safe place of homeschooling. And so to me, again, just going back to learning in unusual ways, homeschooled allowed us to think outside the box. And we didn't know the rules of filmmaking. We didn't know the rules of music. And I don't know if you guys know this. We didn't mention it earlier. I don't think I mentioned it, but my brothers are in a band called Faki and Country. And Faki and Country's success has been incredibly, it's been a family. We built it as a family. You know, my dad manages them. My other brother works in their marketing and manages them as well. I've done all the music videos, but again, it allowed us to think outside the box and do things together as a family. That if we had gone through the typical education process and gone on to film school, we wouldn't be doing it differently. If they had gone on to music school, they probably wouldn't think outside the box in how they write their music or how they compose their music or how they work together as a family to take their message to the world. So I can't look back at my journey as a filmmaker and think that schooling or film school would have made me any better at what I do. I, in fact, think it would have limited the ceiling of my creativity.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you talked about. What is the limiter? You know, we talk about curiosity is now one of the biggest, one of the only remaining limiters to learning. And we have an education system that unfortunately in a lot of situations does quash the creativity and the curiosity of kids rather than giving them that lifelong love of learning. Kasica,
HR Limited insert Smallbone. I didn't know King Country. I'm a huge fan of King Country. So that is super cool. Congrats to you and your family. Very inspiring. Love their music. Absolutely big fans.
And if you had them on right now, Charlie or Matt, they would tell you the same thing. They are not educated whatsoever. I don't even know. I shouldn't say this loudly, but I'm not even positive they got their high school diplomas. I think that they were so thrust into music. They may have got their GEDs, but by the time they were graduating high school, they were already doing what they wanted to do. They had already spent half a decade refining their art, their creativity, learning how to write songs, learning how to produce music, learning just enough of playing drums and piano to put a track down.
Love it.
And that's the journey of a lot of my family. And again, talk about thinking outside the box. We didn't know what the box was. We didn't even know there was a box that existed.
Hey, well, we would love to. We might need to just have a whole Smallbone series. Would King and Country be on an open education podcast, Ben?
Oh, my brother Joel doesn't have kids yet, but my brother is he's very loud about the power of homeschooling.
Okay, well, we might have to get them on just to have them tell their story.
Yeah,
that'd be sweet.
And you said they weren't educated, but it makes me think of the Mark Twain quote, "I never let my schooling interfere with my education." So maybe they weren't very schooled, but I think based on the story you told, they were certainly educated. Kasica, do you have anything to add in terms of, if not film school, like where can people, and there's different aspects of the industry, right? Not everybody is behind the camera. Can you tell us, like, what is a showrunner? What does a showrunner do? And what kinds of preparation can people undertake either on their own or with a mixture of, personalized education to get their bearings before maybe reaching out to some of their contacts or friends of friends, things like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I second what Smallbone said, which is just go start doing things. If you start to do things, you're way ahead of the game. And I've met, not just in film, but on the music side too, people that, there's a really popular, I don't know if it's still popular, but there's a school called Full Sail. I think it's in Florida. And, you go and it's $100,000 and you learn how to either do music production or, music, performance, things like that, or film, I think too. And you get out of that, and you have a degree and you have $100,000 in debt, and you're starting your career at the bottom and getting coffee for people in the music world or whatever that is, right? You don't have to have a degree to start. You can literally just go to Best Buy and start making things. My introduction to the production world was in the kind of music video and commercial space. So we started doing, local commercials, and those led to eventually we were doing commercials for Target, Jockey, Intel, GE Healthcare. But it started with like, your mom and pop shops that needed a 30-second ad, and we just did it. And some of them were terrible, some of them were okay. And we kind of just failed forward and expanded and scaled into that. And when we came out to LA, I remember a friend of mine was like, okay, we went out and came out this direction to start on film and television. I met with a friend who'd been there for a few years, and I was telling him what I wanted to do. And he's like, okay, what are you waiting for? Like, and he went on to say, are you waiting for somebody to pick you? And I was like, I think I am. I think I'm waiting for somebody to pick. And he's like, it doesn't work like that, especially in Hollywood. He's like, no one's just like going to stumble on you and go, like, you've never done anything before. And they're going to go, I'm going to give you $5 million to go make the movie you want to make. He's like, it doesn't work like that. He's like, just start doing something, do anything, make one thing, and you're ahead of the game in most of Hollywood, which is an industry full of just talk. Everybody just talks about all the things they want to do and could do or could be doing. So just go make stuff. And I think when you're homeschooled, you have a lot of free time and you can go make stuff, and you'd be amazed that like you can actually make a living as a teenager, making stuff on YouTube, throwing it up on YouTube, entering filmmaking contests, entering festivals, just starting to get your feet wet. And if eventually your stuff will get better and good, and then people will start hiring you to create content for them. And so that's definitely my recommendation as well. As far as a showrunner, there's different types of showrunners. Most of the time, a showrunner is like that lead writer for a television show. I'm actually not. I'm a writer. I'm a creative. I'm probably more on the like holistic looking at shepherding the project and bringing it to fruition. But for lead writers, that's something that I think it's just starting to put pen to paper, starting to write scripts and get feedback on them, and find other filmmakers, people like Smallbone was, 20 years ago, that are like, hey, I want to shoot films. Like, okay, that's a great marriage right there, a writer and a director. And so just start to write, read tons of scripts. And don't be afraid to put stuff out there. Like there very much is this, like, you just fail forward, you start making bad art, and then eventually that bad art's going to turn into great art. And share it with your friends and family that are going to be honest with you, like Smallbone said. And they'll be, you're going to see growth as you just start to do things. That whole 10,000 hours, concept definitely applies to the space.
I love that. Go make stuff, and, don't be afraid to fail. Get the feedback from the people who love you enough to tell you when it is not your best work, or maybe it is your best work at that time. Is there anything else that needs to be said that hasn't been said here? I'll let you think about that for a second. I just want to put in another plug for the film, which is in theaters now. Homestead. It's a film. It's also a TV series. You can check out the trailer online. We'll include it in the show notes. But yeah, what hasn't been said here that you think maybe to just kind of wrap us up needs to be said, either about the film or filmmaking?
I've got just something in general that I've experienced just this last week with my kids. And Kasica, you briefly mentioned it, but one of the beauties of homeschooling is you got a plethora of time. And my mom has a saying, which, by the way, you should definitely interview my mother. She homeschooled, 7 kids. She says, I wanted to set the groundwork in the house for the kids to be bored. And I think boredom in modern society is such a rare thing. But in the boredom, we came up with really crazy stuff. Whether it was games that we played, how we entertained each other, or the forts that we build that then turned into, hey, why don't we write some music? Or, let's write a screenplay. And being bored, it actually encouraged us to get outside of the box and try things and do things, because we otherwise we're going to literally die of boredom. And my mom actually encouraged it. We didn't play video games. We were only allowed to watch an hour of TV a week. I wish I could say that's the same thing with my kids. I have allowed them to play way too many video games and watch way too much TV, but just this week cut that down dramatically in hopes of making them bored. So they go out to excite and explore. So they go out and learn to play games and come up with creative ways of entertaining themselves for hours and not let other people entertain them. They have to figure out how to entertain themselves, and that'll lead to really exciting, creative opportunities, hopefully, for them.
I love that. And the idea of sort of, getting kids behind cameras instead of in front of screens. There's a balance to be found there. And I don't think any of us has found the right balance quite yet, but we're all working on it. And it's amazing to hear your guys' story. I'm super stoked to see the film and watch the TV series. Just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us, and can't wait to see what you do next.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.